The courtroom falls into a stunned silence. Judge Whitman's gavel slips from his fingers, clattering against the wooden bench. District Attorney Maxwell Porter's face drains of color as he stares at the document in his trembling hands. The highest level NSA clearance he's ever seen. Eleanor Washington, the 50-year-old black woman he'd been viciously prosecuting for fraud for the past hour, now stands with perfect composure, her eyes boring into his with quiet power. "Perhaps," she says softly, "you'd like to reconsider those charges, Mr. Porter. How did this moment of vindication come to be, and what price did Eleanor pay to reach it? If you believe in the power of truth and justice against racism, hit that like button and subscribe, because tomorrow's episode reveals what happens when the powerful underestimate those they oppress." Eleanor Washington carefully hung her blazer in the hallway closet, the weight of her day heavy on her shoulders. At 50 years old, the lines on her face told stories of resilience, not just age. Her modest home in Westbrook, a predominantly white suburb of Philadelphia, was her sanctuary, a place where she could shed the layers of her carefully constructed identity. To her neighbors and colleagues, she was just a mid-level administrator for GovTech Solutions, a government contractor. The truth was far more complex. For 27 years, Eleanor had served as a high-level NSA operative with top security clearance, conducting operations that had saved countless American lives. She had maintained this cover flawlessly while raising her 2 children as a single mother after her husband's death in military service. Her son Jordan was now in his 2nd year of college on a partial scholarship, and her daughter Maya was a high school senior with dreams of becoming a doctor. The letter had arrived 3 days ago. Its official IRS letterhead and cold, formal language announced an audit of her tax returns from 3 years prior. Eleanor wasn't worried initially. Her financial affairs were meticulously organized, a habit ingrained from her training. The initial meeting with local IRS agent Dennis Keller changed everything. From the moment she entered his office, his body language screamed suspicion. His eyes narrowed as he reviewed her documentation, focusing intensely on her charitable donations and certain business expenses, all of which were actually part of her carefully constructed cover. "These donations seem quite generous for someone of your position," Keller remarked, the pause before position heavy with insinuation. "I believe in giving back to my community," Eleanor replied evenly, maintaining her calm exterior while her trained mind catalogued his microaggressions. Despite providing complete documentation for every item questioned, Keller's demeanor remained cold and accusatory. "There are inconsistencies here that concern me," he stated, refusing to elaborate further. The following week, Eleanor learned that Keller had escalated her case, reporting significant inconsistencies to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation. This unusual step bypassed several normal procedures in tax discrepancy cases. Eleanor immediately attempted to contact her NSA handler, Richard Summers, through their secure channel. His response was swift but troubling. "Maintain cover at all costs. No intervention possible at this time." The terseness of the message was unusual and concerning. The case was assigned to District Attorney Maxwell Porter, an ambitious prosecutor, known in legal circles for his harsh treatment of minority defendants and impressive conviction record. Porter had made no secret of his political aspirations for the State Attorney General's office, and high-profile convictions were the currency of his campaign. For Porter, Eleanor represented an opportunity, a well-spoken, educated black woman, living in an affluent area. Convicting her of fraud would reinforce his tough-on-crime image while appealing to the racial biases of certain voter demographics. He personally signed the charges: tax fraud and identity misrepresentation. Eleanor's initial meeting with her court-appointed public defender, Mark Tanner, was another blow. The overworked attorney barely looked up from her file during their brief consultation. "Look, Mrs. Washington, these cases are pretty straightforward. The DA's office doesn't bring charges unless they're confident. My advice is to consider a plea deal." His assumption of her guilt was evident in every word. "I'm innocent," Eleanor stated firmly, "and it's Ms. Washington." Tanner finally looked at her, sighing. "They all say that. Let's be realistic about your situation." The first true escalation came without warning. Eleanor's debit card was declined at the grocery store, a humiliating experience, as the line of customers behind her grew impatient. Upon reaching her car, she discovered that all her bank accounts had been frozen as part of the investigation. This extraordinary measure was typically reserved for major financial crimes or terrorism cases. With her accounts frozen, Eleanor couldn't pay her mortgage, payment due in 3 days, or the final installment of Jordan's tuition for the semester. Her carefully built life was beginning to crumble around her. That evening, her neighbor Margaret, who had always been friendly, crossed to the other side of the street when she saw Eleanor walking home. The whispers had already begun. By the end of the week, Eleanor overheard snippets of conversation at the local coffee shop. Living beyond her means, probably using fake identities, these people always find ways to game the system. Eleanor Washington had navigated hostile territories, decoded enemy communications, and protected national security for decades. Now she faced a different kind of threat, one attacking not just her freedom, but her very identity and the family she had devoted her life to protecting. Porter wasted no time assigning his most aggressive investigator to Eleanor's case. Detective Sandra Blake had a reputation for thoroughness that bordered on harassment when dealing with minority suspects. Within days, she obtained warrants to search both Eleanor's home and her workplace. The home search was conducted with unnecessary force. Eleanor stood silently watching as officers pulled books from shelves, emptied drawers onto the floor, and handled family photographs with careless disregard. When they reached the curio cabinet containing her late mother's crystal collection, an officer roughly shoved the pieces aside, shattering a delicate angel figurine that had been a wedding gift. "Be careful with that," Eleanor said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Maybe you should have thought about your precious things before committing fraud," the officer replied, not bothering to hide his contempt. The search at GovTech Solutions was even more humiliating. Detective Blake and 2 uniformed officers entered during lunch hour when the open plan office was at its fullest. Colleagues stared as the officers boxed up her computer and files, whispering behind raised hands. Thomas Reed, her supervisor, called her into his glass-walled office afterward, the entire floor watching the conversation. "I'm placing you on administrative leave pending investigation," he informed her, avoiding eye contact. "We can't have this kind of situation affecting client confidence." "Tom, we've worked together for 8 years, Eleanor said quietly. "It's not personal, Eleanor, it's company policy." But he still wouldn't meet her eyes, and she knew it was very personal indeed. That afternoon, Maya came home from school in tears. "Everyone's talking about it, Mum. Jesse Peters asked if you were going to jail, and Tyler Baker said his dad told him all black people with nice houses are probably doing something illegal." Eleanor held her daughter close, fury and heartbreak warring within her. "None of that is true, baby. We'll get through this." She attempted to contact Richard Summers again through their emergency protocols, but found the communication channels had been mysteriously altered. Her access codes no longer worked. For the first time in her career, Eleanor felt truly isolated from her agency support. Detective Blake's investigation uncovered what she termed significant inconsistencies in Eleanor's employment history. Gaps and overlaps that were actually carefully constructed elements of her non-official cover. Blake interpreted these as evidence of identity deception. Eleanor's neighbors now openly avoided her. While retrieving her mail, she overheard her neighbor Brad telling his wife, "These people are always looking for handouts or shortcuts. I bet she's been running scams for years." Porter, seeing an opportunity to expand the case against Eleanor, added charges of identity fraud, claiming she had been using false identities for financial gain. The local news ran the story that evening, using a particularly unflattering photograph of Eleanor looking angry after being caught in a sudden rainstorm. The caption read, "Local administrator charged with complex fraud scheme." The article emphasized the unexplained wealth that allowed a government clerk to live in Westbrook and send her son to a private university. What the investigation couldn't uncover, because it was classified above even Porter's clearance level, was that these inconsistencies were part of Eleanor's carefully constructed cover identity, created and maintained by the NSA for over 2 decades. Eleanor realized with growing alarm that someone was actively preventing her from reaching her NSA contacts. Every secure channel she attempted was blocked or diverted. Was this just bureaucratic caution to avoid exposing an operative, or something more sinister? Her phone rang that evening, Jordan calling from university. "Mom, I just got called into the financial aid office. They're reviewing my scholarship because of what's happening with you. They're saying there's concern about the source of our family income." Eleanor closed her eyes, steadying herself against the kitchen counter. "Don't worry, baby. Focus on your studies. I'll handle this." But how? With each passing day, the web tightened around her. Porter was building his case, her professional reputation was in tatters, and her children were suffering. And somewhere, within the NSA, communication channels that should have protected her had gone silent. Have you ever faced a situation where the system designed to protect citizens was used against you? Comment number 1 if you've experienced or witnessed institutional racism, like Eleanor is facing. If you believe everyone deserves fair treatment in our justice system, regardless of race, hit that like button and subscribe to support stories that expose these injustices. What would you do if you were Eleanor? Fight the charges publicly or try to reach her NSA contacts despite the risks? And what sinister forces might be blocking her from reaching the very agency she's served faithfully? For decades, Eleanor's arraignment was scheduled before Judge William Whitman, a man whose sentencing disparities between white and black defendants had been flagged by civil rights organizations multiple times, yet he remained firmly entrenched in his position, due to powerful connections. The courtroom was cold that morning, but not as cold as the stares Eleanor received as she walked down the center aisle. Her public defender, Mark Tanner, met her at the defense table, his briefcase noticeably thin, compared to the stacks of materials the prosecution had arranged. "The DA's office sent over a plea agreement this morning," Tanner whispered, sliding a document toward her. 18 months with possibility of parole after 12, plus restitution. Given the evidence they claim to have, it's not a bad deal. Eleanor skimmed the document, noting it would require admitting to crimes she hadn't committed and would result in a felony record that would destroy her life. "I'm not pleading guilty to anything. I've done nothing wrong." Tanner sighed heavily. "I've barely had time to review half the evidence they've submitted. I'm not prepared for a trial against Porter's full team." "Then get a continuance," Eleanor replied firmly. When her case was called, Judge Whitman peered down at her over his reading glasses with thinly veiled disdain. Porter approached the bench with confidence, outlining the charges with theatrical gravity. "Your Honor, the defendant has perpetrated a complex scheme of financial fraud and identity deception spanning several years. Given the sophisticated nature of these crimes and the defendant's connections, we consider her a significant flight risk." Tanner's request for a continuance was briskly denied. When he weakly protested the flight risk designation, pointing out Eleanor's deep community ties and her children's dependence on her, Judge Whitman cut him off. "The defendant's bail is set at $250,000. The amount was staggering far above standard bail for similar charges. Eleanor felt the floor shift beneath her. There was no way she could raise that kind of money with her accounts frozen. After 3 days in county lockup, Eleanor made a call she had hoped to avoid. Her 73-year-old mother, Beatrice, answered on the first ring, as if she'd been sitting by the phone. "I need help, Mama," Eleanor said, the words catching in her throat. Beatrice Washington had survived the civil rights era in Mississippi. She understood institutional injustice all too well. "I'll use my retirement savings," she said without hesitation. "You just hold your head up." Upon release, Eleanor found her car in the courthouse parking lot, its sides spray-painted with racist slurs. The security cameras in that section were unfortunately malfunctioning that day, according to security. Her search for private legal representation proved almost as demoralizing. 4 attorneys declined to take her case after learning Porter was the prosecutor. "I have to maintain a working relationship with the DA's office," one explained apologetically. "Taking on Porter directly would compromise my other clients." Finally, Eleanor found Patricia Chen, a young attorney just 5 years out of law school, who had once been an intern in Porter's office and left after witnessing his discriminatory practices firsthand. "I've been looking for a chance to expose Porter's methods," Chen told Eleanor during their first meeting. "But I need to warn you, he holds grudges and he fights dirty." Chen's first discovery request revealed troubling gaps. "Evidence that should be here is missing," she told Eleanor, spreading documents across her small office's conference table. "Bank statements that would show the legitimate source of your income, documentation of your employment history, anything that could help your case seems to have been omitted." Porter's response to their request for complete discovery was dismissive. "All relevant materials have been provided." The third major escalation came in the form of late-night phone calls to Eleanor's home. The first was simply heavy breathing, then a hang-up. The second, more direct. "Take the deal or things get worse for you and your kids." The calls came from different burner phones, impossible to trace. Porter offered what he called a one-time courtesy deal, reduced charges, but still including jail time and a felony record. "Given the mounting evidence against your client, this is extremely generous," he told Chen during a courthouse hallway conversation deliberately timed to occur when Eleanor was using the restroom. Chen filed motions challenging the evidence collection, procedures and the unusual freezing of Eleanor's assets before conviction. Judge Whitman denied them all within hours, some without the customary review period. While researching Porter's previous cases, Eleanor discovered his campaign website for State Attorney General prominently featured a promise to prosecute sophisticated financial crimes that drain our economy, alongside a thinly veiled reference to her case. The final blow that week came from Maya, who sat at the kitchen table with college rejection letters spread before her. "Dartmouth was my dream school. Mom, my test scores and grades are better than almost everyone in my class who got accepted." Her voice cracked. "My counselor thinks it's because of our current family situation. They don't want their acceptance rates associated with families under criminal investigation." Eleanor embraced her daughter, her mind racing. The systematic dismantling of her family's future was proceeding with terrifying efficiency. Someone with significant power was ensuring that every avenue of defense was cut off, every escape route blocked, and every support system undermined. But why? Was this simply Porter's ambition and bias at work, or was there something deeper at play? Eleanor's instincts, honed through decades of intelligence work, told her this level of coordination suggested a more powerful force behind the scenes, possibly connected to her classified work at NSA. The call came at 3:17 a.m. Eleanor fumbled for her phone in the darkness, her heart racing. "Ms. Washington, this is Mercy Hospital. Your mother has been admitted with stroke symptoms." Eleanor dressed quickly, the world narrowing to a tunnel of fear. Beatrice Washington had been her rock, her moral compass, her unfailing support. And now the stress of Eleanor's case had taken its toll. The fluorescent hospital lighting cast sickly shadows across the emergency room. Eleanor approached the reception desk, giving her mother's name. The nurse's friendly demeanor changed subtly as she typed the name into her computer. Her eyes flicked to Eleanor's face, then back to the screen. "Oh, you're the daughter? The one from the news?" "Yes." "May I see my mother now?" The nurse's smile didn't return. "I'll need to see your ID first." Throughout her hospital stay, Eleanor noticed how staff treated her differently once they made the connection to the news stories. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Simple requests were met with scrutiny. One doctor explained her mother's condition without making eye contact, speaking primarily to the wall behind Eleanor's head. Jordan returned home the following week, his face drawn with worry. "They froze my academic registration, Mum. Said they couldn't process my financial aid with our accounts under investigation. I can't even register for next semester." Eleanor held her son, this brilliant young man whose future was being derailed by forces beyond his control. "We'll fight this," she promised, though the path forward remained unclear. That night, the sound of breaking glass jolted Eleanor from sleep. She moved instinctively to Maya's room first, finding her daughter awake and terrified. "Stay here," she commanded, reverting to her operational training. Downstairs, the living room window had been shattered. Bricks lay on the carpet, each wrapped in paper with messages. "Fraudster, go back to where you came from. Criminals don't belong here." Eleanor called the police, who arrived 45 minutes later, despite the station being less than 10 minutes away. The officers took cursory notes, suggested she invest in security cameras, and left without dusting for fingerprints or canvassing for witnesses. "Probably just kids," one officer remarked dismissively. "Nothing we can do without evidence." Over the next few days, Eleanor began noticing a silver sedan that appeared too frequently in her neighborhood. The same car was often parked near her mother's hospital. She was being followed, and not particularly subtly. Eleanor attempted to use the NSA emergency protocols, methods of last resort designed for deep-cover operatives who had lost regular communication channels. She sent coded messages through seemingly innocent social media posts, used dead drops established years earlier, and attempted to reach out through back-channel connections. Each attempt met with silence. When she finally managed to access a secure verification system, her credentials returned as not recognized in the system. It was as if her entire operational history had been erased. Patricia Chen arrived at Eleanor's home the next day, her expression grim. "Porter has started investigating me as well. He's requested my complete financial records and client list, claiming it's related to your case. It's pure intimidation." Eleanor poured them both tea with steadier hands than she felt. "You don't have to continue, Patricia. I understand if this is too much risk for your career." Chen squared her shoulders. "My father came to this country believing in American justice. I became a lawyer to defend that ideal. I'm not backing down because a racist prosecutor is throwing his weight around." Eleanor's former colleagues at GovTech Solutions now avoided her completely. Rebecca, who had been her lunch partner for years, crossed the hospital cafeteria to avoid sitting near Eleanor during a visit to her mother. The company's HR department sent a formal letter extending her administrative leave indefinitely. The fourth major escalation arrived in a plain manila envelope left at her front door. Inside were photographs of Jordan walking across his college campus, Maya leaving school, and Eleanor's mother being wheeled to physical therapy at the hospital. A note read, "Accidents happen. Take the deal." Porter leaked selected evidence to specific media outlets, creating a narrative of Eleanor as a calculating criminal who had manipulated government systems for personal gain. The stories emphasized how she had infiltrated an affluent community while concealing her true identity. Chen filed a motion for change of venue, citing the prejudicial media coverage and community hostility. Judge Whitman denied it without a hearing, stating tersely that the court finds no evidence of community prejudice that would prevent a fair trial. Eleanor's health began to deteriorate under the relentless pressure. She developed insomnia, waking hourly to check doors and windows. Anxiety attacks left her breathless and disoriented. During a hospital visit, a nurse noticed her elevated blood pressure and recommended medical intervention. "This level of stress is dangerous," the nurse warned, one of the few medical professionals who treated Eleanor with normal compassion. Through persistent research and her attorney's connections, Chen discovered that IRS agent Keller and District Attorney Porter had worked together on at least 7 previous cases, all involving minority defendants. 6 had resulted in plea deals after aggressive prosecution. 1 ended in suicide before trial. "This isn't coincidence," Chen told Eleanor. "They're targeting specific types of people, building their careers on these cases." As Eleanor sat by her mother's hospital bed that evening, holding her frail hand, she wondered how many others had faced this systematic destruction without her resources and training. How many lives had been ruined by Porter and Keller's collaboration? And why had her NSA protection vanished when she needed it most? Do you believe our justice system treats everyone equally regardless of race? Comment number 1. If you think institutional racism still influences courts and law enforcement today. If you believe in exposing corruption in our legal system, hit that like button and subscribe to support important stories about justice in America. What would you sacrifice to protect your family from an unjust system? And why would powerful figures go to such extreme lengths to destroy one black woman's reputation and family? What secrets might Eleanor's NSA work hold that makes her such a target? Eleanor sat in her car outside a modest ranch house in Northern Virginia, watching the residence of Michael Reeves. As a retired NSA Deputy Field Operations Director, Reeves had been her supervisor during her early career. Though they hadn't spoken in nearly 5 years, he represented her best hope for understanding what was happening within the agency. She approached his door knowing the risk she was taking. Unauthorized contact with former intelligence personnel could be construed as a security violation, giving her enemies more ammunition. Reeves opened the door before she knocked, security camera feed visible on his tablet. Hage had whitened his hair but not dimmed the sharpness in his eyes. "Eleanor Washington, I was wondering when you'd show up." "You've heard," she said, not a question. Enough to be concerned. He ushered her inside, immediately activating a signal. "Jammer. Your situation has created quite the buzz in certain circles. I need to know why my credentials have been suspended and why no one will respond to my emergency protocols." Reeves hesitated, weighing loyalty against self-preservation. "Getting involved could bring attention I don't need in retirement. Michael, they're not just coming after me. They're destroying my children's futures." "My mother had a stroke from the stress." Eleanor's voice remained steady, but her eyes conveyed the desperation she wouldn't verbalize. After a long moment, Reeves nodded. "I still have contacts. I'll make inquiries carefully. But Eleanor, if this is what I suspect, there are powerful people involved." While Reeves worked his connections, Eleanor and Chen developed a strategy to expose Porter's pattern of racial bias in prosecutions. They pored over court records, identifying cases with similar profiles minorities charged with financial crimes, receiving disproportionately harsh treatment. "We need to show this isn't an isolated incident," Chen explained. "If we can prove systemic bias in Porter's prosecution choices, we can challenge the fundamental fairness of your case." They located 5 previous defendants who fit the pattern, all minorities, all charged with financial crimes, all pressured into plea deals despite questionable evidence. Chen reached out to each, and initially 3 agreed to provide statements about their experiences with Porter and Keller. Within days, all 3 withdrew their cooperation. One called Eleanor directly, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry. Someone from the DA's office visited my boss. They mentioned how damaging it would be for the company to employ someone with my record. I can't risk my job. My family depends on it." The 5th escalation struck with precision. Eleanor received a call from Chen at midnight. "My office has been broken into," her attorney said, voice tight with tension. "They took your case files, copied my hard drive, and left everything else. This wasn't a random burglary." The police response was predictably dismissive. Despite the selective nature of the theft, the official report classified it as a routine burglary and mentioned that the area had seen several similar incidents recently, though Chen could find no reports of such crimes. 2 days later, Reeves contacted Eleanor through an encrypted messaging app they had established. "Your status was suspended under Protocol 27B, potential compromise of an operative. But the order didn't come through normal channels. Someone with deputy director level access marked your status as temporarily suspended under unusual circumstances. I'm still trying to determine who. Do you think it's connected to my prosecution?" Eleanor asked during their secure call. "It's too coordinated to be coincidence," Reeves confirmed. "Eleanor, think back. What was your last major operation before this started?" Eleanor's mind raced through her recent assignments, stopping at Operation Blackbird, an investigation into a domestic terrorism network with disturbing connections to law enforcement in several states. Her team had uncovered evidence of police officers, judges, and local officials participating in a white nationalist organization planning coordinated attacks on government buildings and minority communities. "Operation Blackbird," she told Reeves. "We identified over 30 law enforcement officials involved in a domestic terrorism network. Most were arrested, but some suspects remained unidentified when the operation concluded." "That might explain it," Reeves said grimly. "If Porter or Judge Whitman had connections to that network," the pieces began falling into place. Eleanor and Chen started carefully mapping connections between Porter, Whitman, and individuals tangentially mentioned in the Blackbird investigation. The overlap was disturbing. Judge Whitman attended law school with Samuel Garrison, One of the unindicted co-conspirators from Blackbird, Chen noted, showing Eleanor the alumni records. And Porter worked in the same prosecutor's office as Tyler Landry before Landry was arrested in the operation. The web of connections expanded as they continued their research. 8 of the prosecutors and judges who had worked regularly with Porter had social or professional ties to individuals investigated during Blackbird. Meanwhile, Maya was pulled over by police 3 times in a single week while driving to school, each time for minor or imaginary infractions like tail light appearing dim or stopping too long at a stop sign. "They're just messing with me because of you, Mum," Maya said, trying to sound brave despite her shaking hands. "One officer kept asking if I was hiding anything illegal because it runs in families." Community pressure continued mounting. A neighborhood association meeting, which Eleanor was not invited to attend, included an agenda item about maintaining community standards and safety, thinly veiled code for removing the criminal element from their midst. Neighbors who had previously been friendly now crossed streets to avoid greeting her, and anonymous letters appeared in her mailbox suggesting she do the right thing and move somewhere more appropriate. Eleanor felt the noose tightening. Someone was systematically isolating her, cutting off support, and creating an environment where she would be willing to take a plea deal simply to end the torment. But knowing that her prosecution might be connected to domestic terrorists made surrender impossible. This was no longer just about clearing her name. It was about exposing a dangerous network that had infiltrated the justice system. "We're going on the offensive," Eleanor announced, spreading documents across Chen's kitchen table. With Chen's office compromised, they had moved their strategy sessions to more secure locations, rotating between their homes and public spaces, where they could blend with crowds. "Porter expects us to stay defensive, responding to each new attack. Instead, we'll change the battlefield." Chen looked up from her notes, a spark of hope in her eyes, for the first time in weeks. "What are you thinking?" A civil rights complaint against Porter's office, documenting the pattern of discriminatory prosecution. "We'll file with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division." The complaint was meticulously documented, outlining Porter's history of targeting minorities with aggressive prosecutions while offering plea deals or declining to prosecute similar cases involving white defendants. They included statistical analyses, case comparisons, and sworn statements from 2 former interns from the DA's office who had witnessed Porter's explicit bias. The civil rights complaint was assigned to investigator Warren Phillips, who promised to review it thoroughly. Eleanor's hope was short-lived. A quick background check revealed that Phillips had attended the same fraternity as Porter and had donated to his campaign for district attorney. The media coverage that followed the civil rights filing was brutally one-sided. "Fraud defendant claims racism to escape charges," read one headline. "Washington plays race card in last-ditch effort," proclaimed another. The stories portrayed Eleanor as desperately grasping at straws rather than facing justice for her crimes. Reeves provided Eleanor with troubling new information. "Your case file has unusual national security markers attached to it. These are typically used to flag cases involving terrorism or espionage. Someone is manipulating the system to isolate you." The 6th escalation targeted Chen directly. The Pennsylvania Bar Association sent formal notice that she was under investigation for allegedly revealing sealed evidence in Eleanor's case. The complaint, filed anonymously, could potentially lead to disbarment. "This is complete fabrication," Chen said, her hands shaking as she read the notice. "I've never revealed sealed evidence." "They're trying to remove you from my case," Eleanor responded, her mind racing through contingencies. "Without competent legal representation, they believe I'll be forced to accept a plea." That night, Eleanor returned home to find her front door slightly ajar. With the caution born from years of field operations, she circled around to enter through the back. Inside, nothing obvious was missing, but her trained eye spotted the subtle signs of a professional search. More concerning were the tiny devices she discovered using a signal detector she'd retrieved from an old dead-drop surveillance equipment had been installed throughout her home. Rather than removing the devices, which would alert the watchers, Eleanor created a secure space in her basement. Using construction materials and techniques that would block electronic surveillance, she built what appeared to be storage shelving, but actually created a small room where she could speak freely with Reeves and Chen. "We need to reach someone above Wallace's pay grade," Reeves advised during their next secure meeting. "Someone who can override his suspension of your credentials and investigate what's happening." "Admiral Jonathan Hayes," Eleanor suggested immediately. "Former NSA director. He personally recruited me and knows my operational history." "Hayes has been out of the loop for 3 years since retirement," Reeves cautioned. "But he still has the connections and clearance to make inquiries no one would question," Eleanor countered. "And he's beyond reproach. Even Wallace wouldn't dare interfere with his requests for information." They devised a plan to reach Hayes using old Cold War-era protocols methods, so outdated they might bypass modern surveillance. Eleanor crafted their message using a one-time cipher that only Hayes would recognize from a joint operation they had run in Iran decades earlier. Porter somehow learned of their attempt to reach outside his sphere of influence. Within hours of Eleanor sending the coded message, she received notice that her trial date had been moved up by 6 weeks, an almost unprecedented acceleration. Judge Whitman denied all motions for delay, claiming, "The court's calendar has unexpectedly cleared, allowing for this matter to be resolved more expeditiously." Chen's paralegal, Ryan Diaz, made a disturbing discovery while delivering documents to the courthouse. "I saw Porter going into Judge Whitman's chambers," he reported. "They were in there together for over an hour with the door closed, when Chen filed a motion citing this ex parte communication as grounds for Whitman's recusal. The judge appeared momentarily cornered. To their surprise, he actually granted the motion, only to ensure the case was reassigned to Judge Hamilton, another close associate who had been best man at Whitman's wedding. The final blow came when Eleanor received a frantic call from Jordan. "Mom, they arrested me outside the library. They're saying they found drugs in my car, but that's impossible. I've never used drugs in my life." The setup was transparent. Jordan had been arrested by campus police after an anonymous tip led to a search of his car, where a small bag of cocaine was discovered under the driver's seat. The timing, just days before Eleanor's accelerated trial, eliminated any doubt about the connection. "They're using my children to break me," Eleanor told Chen, her voice calm but her eyes reflecting a dangerous resolve. "They've miscalculated. Badly." Eleanor Washington had spent her career working within the system, defending American institutions even when they failed to defend people who looked like her. Now, facing the very corruption she had fought against, she made a decision. The gloves would come off. If Porter and his network wanted war, she would give them one they wouldn't forget. Have you ever reached a breaking point where playing by the rules no longer seemed possible? Comment number 1. If you believe sometimes you have to fight fire with fire when facing systematic injustice. If you think our justice system needs greater accountability, hit that like button and subscribe to support stories that expose corruption. What lengths would you go to protect your children from being used as pawns in someone else's power game? And with Eleanor now ready to use her full NSA training against her persecutors, will she finally reach Admiral Hayes in time to save her family and expose the conspiracy within the justice system? Eleanor's coded message reached former NSA Director Admiral Jonathan Hayes at his fishing cabin in Montana. Despite 3 years of retirement, Hayes maintained certain secure communication channels, a common practice among those who had held the highest levels of clearance. The message's encryption method, one they had developed together during a critical operation in 2003, instantly caught his attention. Upon decoding Eleanor's message, Hayes's face darkened. He immediately packed his gear and headed back to Washington, D.C., making specific calls from untraceable phones along the way. By the time he reached the Capitol, he had already initiated a quiet but thorough investigation into the suspension of Eleanor's credentials. Meanwhile, Eleanor and Chen continued building their defense, while simultaneously working to free Jordan from his clearly fabricated drug charges. The pattern was becoming clearer. Anyone who supported Eleanor faced direct retaliation designed to isolate her completely. "Porter's campaign finances might give us more connections," Chen suggested during a secure meeting in Eleanor's basement room. They began researching his campaign donors, looking for links to the domestic terrorism network Eleanor had helped expose during Operation Blackbird. What they discovered was chilling. 3 of Porter's largest donors were shell companies that, when traced back through multiple layers, connected to organizations identified during the Blackbird investigation. These weren't just casual connections, they formed a pattern of financial support from exactly the groups Eleanor had helped identify as domestic threats. They're not just coming after you because of bias, Chen realized. They're targeting you specifically because of your role in Blackbird. You helped expose their network, and now they're using the legal system to destroy you in retaliation. The web of connections expanded as they dug deeper. Judges who consistently ruled in Porter's favor, police officers who conducted questionable searches, IRS agents who targeted specific individuals, many had tangential connections to groups identified in Blackbird. It's a systematic infiltration of the justice system, Eleanor noted grimly. This goes beyond a few corrupt individuals. They've positioned people throughout the system to protect their interests and target their enemies. Their investigation was interrupted by the 7th major escalation. Chen was attacked outside her home, beaten severely by 2 masked men who specifically mentioned Eleanor's case. "Drop Washington or next time we finish the job," they warned before leaving Chen unconscious in her driveway. With Chen hospitalized with a concussion and broken ribs, Eleanor now faced the prospect of representing herself at trial. Her limited legal knowledge would be no match for Porter's experienced prosecution team, exactly as the attackers had intended. In Washington, Admiral Hayes's investigation began yielding troubling results. Eleanor's credentials had indeed been suspended through unusual channels, bypassing standard protocols. The suspension order originated from Deputy Director Wallace's office, but used security override codes that shouldn't have been available. To him, Hayes discovered that Wallace had been implicated in Eleanor's Blackbird operation, but had narrowly escaped being identified in the final report. His name had appeared in early drafts as having possible connections to one of the domestic groups, but insufficient evidence had led to his exclusion from the final investigation. "He's been waiting for an opportunity to neutralize her," Hayes told his small trusted team. "She got too close to him during Blackbird, and now he's using his position to enable her persecution while protecting himself." While Eleanor prepared to represent herself, Maya found an unexpected way to fight back. After another instance of police harassment, she had the foresight to record the interaction on her phone, the video showing officers clearly targeting her with racist language and references to her mother's case went viral after she posted it online. The video caught the attention of local activist groups who had been monitoring patterns of discrimination in law enforcement. The Greater Philadelphia Civil Liberties Coalition reached out to Maya, offering support and connecting Eleanor with community resources. Porter, seeing the growing social media attention, moved quickly to suppress it. Protest permits were denied on technical grounds, and when small demonstrations formed anyway, participants were arrested for minor infractions. Using her NSA training, Eleanor carefully detected and disabled the surveillance equipment in her home without alerting the watchers that she had found the devices. She replaced them with devices that transmitted pre-recorded loops of routine household activities, creating the illusion that she was unaware of the surveillance while giving herself freedom to operate. With this secure environment established, she created a new communication channel with Hayes, using encryption methods known only to the highest levels of the agency. Wallace is definitely involved, Hayes confirmed during their secure communication. He's been manipulating internal systems to isolate you. I'm working to override his authority, but I need to be careful. He has allies we haven't identified yet. Jordan's drug case began to fall apart under scrutiny. The campus police officers who had discovered the drugs were found to have connections to a former colleague of Porter's. The chain of custody for the evidence showed unexplained gaps. Despite these clear issues, administrators kept Jordan in a legal limbo, unable to return to classes while technically not convicted of any crime. With Eleanor's trial date rapidly approaching and Chen still hospitalized, the conspiracy seemed to be achieving its goal, isolating Eleanor and forcing her into an unwinnable legal battle. But with Hayes now working behind the scenes and community support growing thanks to Maya's viral video. The first small cracks were appearing in Porter's carefully constructed trap. The Philadelphia County Courthouse stood imposing in the morning light, its classical columns and stone facade projecting the authority of law. For Eleanor, approaching those steps felt like entering enemy territory. News vans lined the street, cameras tracking her movement. Without Chen by her side, she carried both their preparation materials in a heavy briefcase. Inside the packed courtroom, Porter sat with his team of 4 assistant prosecutors, their table covered with meticulously organized binders. Eleanor's table was conspicuously empty, except for her single briefcase. The message was clear. She stood alone against the full power of the state. Judge Hamilton entered, his expression giving nothing away. The court recognizes that defense counsel is unable to appear due to medical emergency. Ms. Washington, are you prepared to proceed with jury selection, or do you wish to request a continuance? Before Eleanor could respond, Porter interjected. Your Honor, the state strongly opposes any further delays. Ms. Washington has had ample time to secure additional counsel if she wished. This appears to be a delaying tactic. Eleanor rose, her posture impeccable. Your Honor, my attorney was violently attacked specifically because of this case. I've attempted to secure replacement counsel, but attorneys are unwilling to take on a case where they might be physically endangered. I request a 2-week continuance to either allow Ms. Chen to recover or secure new representation. Judge Hamilton barely considered before responding. Request denied. We will proceed with jury selection immediately. The jury selection process revealed the extent of Porter's preparation. The media coverage had thoroughly poisoned the jury pool, with most potential jurors admitting they had already formed opinions about the case. Porter used his challenges strategically to keep anyone who showed the slightest sympathy toward Eleanor off the jury. Judge Hamilton denied most of Eleanor's objections to clearly biased jurors. By afternoon, the jury was seated 9 white members, 2 Asian Americans who had expressed admiration for law enforcement during questioning, and 1 elderly black man who repeatedly emphasized his belief in the justice system's fairness despite historical issues. Porter's opening statement painted Eleanor as a calculating criminal who had systematically defrauded government systems while living a life of deception. The evidence will show that the defendant created multiple identities to commit financial fraud, on a scale that afforded her a lifestyle far beyond her legitimate means, he told the attentive jury. When Eleanor's turn came, she spoke with the calm precision that had made her an effective intelligence officer. The prosecution has built a case based on misinterpretations, missing context, and manipulated evidence. I will demonstrate that what Mr. Porter presents as criminal activity is, in fact, legitimate financial activity being deliberately misconstrued. The media coverage that evening was overwhelmingly negative. Fraud defendant acts as own attorney. In bizarre courtroom display read one headline. Another stated, Washington defense falls flat as prosecution presents mountain of evidence. As days passed, Porter methodically presented his case, calling witnesses who described Eleanor's financial activities without the classified context that would explain them. IRS investigator Keller testified about unexplained deposits and suspicious patterns of movement in her accounts, all actually related to her covert work for the NSA. Judge Hamilton repeatedly sustained objections against Eleanor's attempts to cross-examine witnesses about their connections to Porter or their potential biases. The witnesses' relationship with the district attorney's office is irrelevant to their testimony about financial records, Hamilton stated after one objection, effectively blocking Eleanor from establishing the coordination behind her prosecution. Meanwhile, Chen struggled to recover in the hospital, sending notes to Eleanor through Maya when possible. Admiral Hayes continued his behind-the-scenes investigation, gradually building a case against Deputy Director Wallace while working to restore Eleanor's official status. The 8th major escalation came when a key witness for Eleanor's defense, a former colleague, who could have testified about her legitimate employment without revealing classified details, disappeared the night before his scheduled testimony. William Foster simply didn't show up at court, and when police conducted a welfare check at Eleanor's request, they found his apartment empty with signs of a hasty departure. Your Honor, Mr. Foster's sudden disappearance under these circumstances suggests witness intimidation, Eleanor argued. I request a delay until he can be located, Porter scoffed. The state suggests that Mr. Foster likely realized that perjuring himself would carry serious consequences and chose to avoid testifying altogether. Judge Hamilton denied the delay, further narrowing Eleanor's defense options. Porter then produced the financial records showing the unexplained deposits to Eleanor's accounts, the regular payments from NSA through various cover channels. Without the ability to explain their legitimate source, they appeared highly suspicious. How do you explain receiving $50,000 in cash deposits over a 6-month period with no corresponding reported income? Porter asked during cross-examination of Eleanor. Those funds were legitimate compensation that cannot be further explained in this setting, Eleanor replied carefully, trying to signal the classified nature of the deposits without explicitly violating security protocols. So you expect the jury to simply take your word that these mysterious cash deposits were legitimate? Porter pressed, his tone dripping with skepticism. During breaks, Eleanor overheard jurors discussing the case, despite strict instructions not to do so. She obviously can't explain where the money came from because it's illegal, one juror remarked. Another responded, why else would someone need multiple identities unless they're hiding something criminal? Chen, still recovering but determined to help, sent a motion for mistrial based on juror misconduct through a paralegal. Judge Hamilton not only denied the motion, but issued a warning that further frivolous motions would result in sanctions. Eleanor received word that Admiral Hayes had been suddenly called to overseas deployment, a suspiciously timed assignment that appeared designed to remove him from the investigation. With Hayes gone, her NSA reinstatement was again suspended, cutting off another avenue of support. Porter's confidence grew visibly as the trial progressed. He began giving interviews during court recesses, careful to appear modest while clearly indicating his expectation of victory. We never prejudge outcomes, but the evidence speaks for itself, he told reporters, smiling for cameras. Through Meyer's continued community outreach, Eleanor discovered that one juror had direct connections to Porter's campaign, having volunteered at fundraising events. This clear conflict of interest should have been disclosed during jury selection but had been concealed. When Eleanor presented this information to Judge Hamilton with supporting documentation, his dismissive response revealed the depth of the corruption she faced. Ms. Washington, unsubstantiated allegations against jurors are serious matters. Without concrete evidence beyond these circumstantial connections, the court will not entertain further disruptions to these proceedings. Consider this a warning. Continued attempts to undermine the jury's integrity will result in contempt charges. The courtroom had become a theater of injustice, with every actor except Eleanor following a carefully choreographed script designed to ensure her conviction. As Porter prepared to call his final witnesses, Eleanor realized that conventional legal strategies would not prevail against a system so thoroughly corrupted. Have you ever witnessed a system so stacked against someone that justice seemed impossible? Comment number 1 if you believe our courts sometimes fail to protect innocent people, especially minorities. If you think everyone deserves fair treatment in our justice system, regardless of race or background, hit that like button and subscribe to support stories that shine light on these critical issues. What would you do if faced with a corrupt judge, prosecutor, and rigged jury all working together? And with Eleanor running out of legal options and Admiral Hayes mysteriously deployed overseas, how can she possibly expose the truth before Porter's carefully orchestrated conviction destroys her life and her children's futures? Admiral Hayes may have been deployed overseas, but he hadn't abandoned Eleanor. Before departing, he activated a rarely used NSA protocol called Operator Protection, a system designed to safeguard deep cover agents whose identities might be compromised through no fault of their own. The protocol assignment fell to Zoe Thompson, a brilliant young NSA analyst with a reputation for thoroughness and unyielding integrity. At 32, Thompson had already distinguished herself by uncovering several internal security breaches that more senior analysts had missed. Review the Washington case completely, Hayes instructed her through secure channels. Follow the evidence wherever it leads, regardless of rank or position. You have my full authority. Thompson began by accessing Eleanor's complete file, her mission history, performance evaluations, and security clearance reviews. The pattern of excellence was unmistakable. For 27 years, Eleanor Washington had served with distinction, completing high-risk operations that had saved countless American lives. Meanwhile, the trial continued its seemingly inevitable march toward conviction. Porter presented his financial expert witnesses, who testified about the sophisticated fraud scheme they claimed Eleanor had perpetrated. Without the classified context of her NSA work, the financial movements indeed appeared suspicious. Eleanor cross-examined each witness as effectively as possible, but Judge Hamilton consistently sustained objections to her most relevant questions. The jury watched with increasingly hostile expressions, their minds apparently already made up. Thompson, digging deeper into the case, discovered the irregularities immediately. The suspension of credentials didn't follow protocol, she noted, in her secure analysis. Override codes were used that shouldn't exist outside emergency situations. She traced the digital trail, finding that Deputy Director Wallace had indeed been the source, but he had covered his tracks skillfully. The ninth escalation came when Porter introduced a surprise witness, Thomas Green, a man claiming to be Eleanor's former associate in financial schemes. Green gave damning but completely fabricated testimony about how Eleanor had allegedly recruited him to help move money through various accounts. Ms. Washington approached me at a financial industry conference in 2018, Green testified smoothly. She explained that she had government connections that allowed her to access certain accounts and offered me a percentage to help launder the proceeds. Eleanor immediately recognized Green as Marcus Harlan, a minor figure from the domestic terrorism network she had helped expose during Operation Blackbird. His appearance had been altered, but the distinctive speech pattern and nervous gesture of touching his right earlobe were unmistakable. When Eleanor attempted to cross-examine Green about his true identity, Judge Hamilton shut down her questions immediately. The witness's background has been established. Stick to questions relevant to his testimony about your financial activities. Your Honor, this witness is not who he claims to be, Eleanor insisted. He's connected to a domestic terrorism investigation and is testifying falsely as part of a coordinated effort to— Ms. Washington, Hamilton interrupted sharply. One more statement like that, and you will be held in contempt. Ask relevant questions or forfeit your cross-examination. With her hands tied by the court's restrictions, Eleanor could not expose Green's true identity or the fabricated nature of his testimony. The jury appeared completely convinced by his performance. At NSA headquarters, Thompson made a breakthrough discovery. Deputy Director Wallace had been communicating regularly with Porter through encrypted channels communications that existed outside official NSA protocols. The timing aligned perfectly with key developments in Eleanor's case. Despite warnings from colleagues about the risk to her career, Thompson took her findings directly to NSA General Counsel Robert Martinez. Sir, I've uncovered evidence suggesting Deputy Director Wallace is misusing NSA resources and authority to facilitate the prosecution of a decorated operative. Martinez reviewed the evidence carefully, his expression growing increasingly grave. This goes beyond misconduct. If accurate, these are criminal actions. Jordan was unexpectedly released from jail that evening. The drug charges dropped without explanation. He immediately sought out Eleanor, bringing critical information from his time inside. Mum, I was approached by another inmate, Jordan explained during a brief court recess. He said he was paid to plant those drugs in my car by a guy matching the description of one of Porter's investigators. He gave me this. Jordan discreetly passed her a small digital recorder containing the inmate's confession. Porter's case appeared nearly complete, with media declaring victory imminent. Headlines nationwide had already shifted to discussing the sentencing phase, with legal analysts speculating on the length of prison term Eleanor would receive. Eleanor and Chen, communicating through encrypted messages Chen managed from her hospital. Bed prepared for Eleanor's testimony, their last chance to present her defense before the seemingly inevitable guilty verdict. Meanwhile, Thompson secured an emergency meeting with the NSA director, bypassing Wallace entirely. After presenting the evidence of Wallace's involvement in targeting Eleanor, she received emergency authorization to reinstate Eleanor's credentials and provide carefully declassified information that would verify her legitimate employment without compromising national security. "We need to move quickly," the director told Thompson after reviewing the evidence. "This isn't just about one agent. It's about the integrity of the entire agency and the justice system itself." The courtroom fell silent as Eleanor took the stand. After days of prosecution witnesses painting her as a calculating criminal, this was her opportunity to present her side. Porter's team had successfully blocked most of her planned defense. Witnesses, making her testimony even more crucial. "Ms. Washington," Porter began his cross-examination before she could even present her direct testimony, a procedural irregularity that Judge Hamilton allowed. "You've heard the extensive evidence of your multiple identities and unexplained income. Do you deny creating these aliases?" Eleanor chose her words carefully, aware of the classified line she couldn't cross without proper clearance. "I have operated under various names as part of my employment obligations. These were not false identities created for fraudulent purposes." "And what exactly is this mysterious employment that requires multiple identities?" Porter pressed, his tone mockingly skeptical. "I work for a government agency in a capacity that includes sensitive operations," Eleanor replied, staying deliberately vague. Porter displayed financial records on the courtroom screens. "You expect this jury to believe that these cash deposits, these international transfers, these property holdings in different names, are all part of legitimate government work?" "Yes, that is exactly what they are," Eleanor stated firmly. Porter turned to the jury, his expression theatrical in its disbelief. "Ms. Washington, in your fantasy world, what government agency permits its mid-level administrators to conduct mysterious financial operations?" Before Eleanor could navigate this dangerous question, Porter shifted tactics, clearly trying to provoke her into revealing classified information in her defense or appearing evasive if she didn't. "Let's discuss your lifestyle, Ms. Washington. How does a government administrator afford a home in Westbrook on your reported salary? How do you explain the tuition payments for your son's education, the luxury vehicle?" Each question distorted her modest middle-class life into something suspicious. Her home, purchased with a VA loan after her husband's military death, was portrayed as extravagant. Jordan's partial scholarship, supplemented by Eleanor's careful saving, was characterized as mysterious money. Her 6-year-old sedan became a luxury vehicle. Throughout Porter's questioning, he wove subtle racial undertones into his narrative, the implication clear that a black woman couldn't legitimately achieve even this modest level of security. The jury appeared completely convinced by Porter's presentation. Several nodded along as he spoke, while others looked at Eleanor with open hostility. Judge Hamilton allowed highly prejudicial questioning that would normally have been restricted. The 10th escalation came when Porter dramatically produced a video he claimed showed Eleanor accepting a cash bribe. The jury will now see footage obtained from a restaurant security camera in July 2021, Porter announced triumphantly. The grainy video showed Eleanor receiving an envelope from a man whose face was not clearly visible. What Porter presented as a bribe was actually Eleanor receiving operational funds during a mission briefing with another agent. Without context, it appeared damning. "Objection," Eleanor called out. "This video is taken completely out of context. This was a legitimate operational meeting related to my work." Chen, who had discharged herself from the hospital against medical advice and arrived halfway through Eleanor's testimony, spoke up from the gallery. "Your Honor, I'm returning as counsel for Ms. Washington. The prosecution has failed to establish proper authentication of this video evidence. Judge Hamilton overruled both objections. The video speaks for itself, and counsel cannot simply reappear and begin objecting after being absent." Eleanor realized she had no choice but to reveal aspects of her true role. "Your Honor, what you're seeing is a classified operational meeting. I cannot explain further without proper authorization, But this was legitimate government business. Ms. Washington inventing increasingly elaborate government conspiracy theories will not help your case, Porter said loudly enough for the jury to hear, though phrased as if speaking directly to Eleanor. Judge Hamilton's warning was immediate. The defendant will refrain from fabricating wild stories to explain criminal behavior. One more such outburst, and you will be held in contempt. As Eleanor struggled against the coordinated effort to paint her as both criminal and delusional, NSA analyst Thompson arrived at the courthouse with General Counsel Martinez and a security team. They were immediately blocked from entering the courtroom by deputies who claimed the judge had ordered no interruptions. Porter, sensing victory, moved for an immediate end to testimony. Your Honor, the defendant's statements demonstrate a pattern of deception that continues even under oath. The state requests that the court move directly to closing arguments. Judge Hamilton nodded. Given the overwhelming evidence and the defendant's continued attempts to mislead this court, I am inclined to grant the state's motion. The jury was about to be instructed to prepare for closing arguments when the courtroom doors burst open. Thompson, flanked by federal marshals who had overridden the local deputy's authority, strode purposefully down the center aisle. Your Honor, Thompson announced firmly, I have an emergency matter related to national security that must be addressed immediately. NSA General Counsel Martinez approached the bench, federal marshals positioning themselves strategically around the courtroom. Your Honor, I am Robert Martinez, General Counsel for the National Security Agency. This proceeding must be paused immediately to address a matter of national security. Judge Hamilton's face flushed with anger. This court will not be interrupted by unscheduled interventions. If you have business here, you can file the appropriate motions. Martinez placed a document bearing the presidential seal on the bench. This is not a request, Your Honor. This is a national security directive that supersedes state court jurisdiction in this specific matter. Porter rushed forward. Your Honor, this is clearly a desperate last-minute ploy by the defendant. Whatever, documents they're presenting should be examined for authenticity before proceedings are disrupted. Thompson stepped forward, placing a second set of documents before the judge. These are the reinstated security credentials for Eleanor Washington, confirming her status as a senior operative with the highest level clearance. Additionally, we have documentation proving that evidence in this case has been deliberately manipulated to facilitate a wrongful prosecution. Porter's face paled slightly, but he recovered quickly. Your Honor, even if Ms. Washington has some government affiliation, it doesn't excuse financial fraud. These people are attempting to obstruct justice with vague national security claims. Martinez turned to Porter. Mr. Porter, are you familiar with the penalties for knowingly prosecuting a case based on manipulated evidence, particularly when that prosecution compromises a national security operative? Eleanor watched the courtroom dynamic shift as Porter's confident facade began to crack. Judge Hamilton appeared torn between his allegiance to Porter and fear of the federal authorities now controlling his courtroom. The court will take a 30-minute recess to review these documents, Hamilton finally announced, gaveling down Porter's attempt to object. In the judge's chambers, Martinez and Thompson presented the evidence they had gathered. Deputy Director, Wallace has been misusing NSA systems to target Ms. Washington specifically because she nearly exposed his connections to domestic extremist groups during Operation Blackbird, Thompson explained, showing digital evidence of Wallace's communications with Porter. These are serious allegations against a high-ranking intelligence official, Hamilton said cautiously, his demeanor now dramatically different. What exactly are you requesting from this court? An immediate dismissal of all charges against Ms. Washington and sealing of the case file to protect operational security, Martinez replied. The Department of Justice will be handling the investigation into misconduct by all parties involved. When court resumed, Eleanor could see that Porter had been communicating frantically during the recess. His typical composure had vanished, replaced by barely concealed panic. The 11th escalation came when Deputy Director Wallace himself entered the courtroom, flanked by his own security team. Your Honor, I am Deputy Director James Wallace of the NSA. I must inform the court that these individuals are overstepping their authority. Ms. Thompson is a junior analyst who has misinterpreted routine administrative actions. Thompson did not back down. Deputy Director Wallace personally suspended Ms. Washington's credentials using emergency override codes to which he should not have had access. I've provided evidence showing communication between Deputy Director Wallace and District Attorney Porter coordinating this prosecution. Wallace's expression hardened. Ms. Thompson, you are discussing classified matters in open court. This could constitute a treasonous breach of national security protocols, Martinez interceded. Deputy Director, threatening a federal whistleblower with treason charges constitutes witness intimidation. The NSA Director has personally authorized Ms. Thompson's actions today. The courtroom erupted in chaos as federal agents moved to detain Wallace. He attempted to leave, but found his path blocked. Porter, seeing his powerful ally cornered, made a desperate move, attempting to delete communications from his phone. A marshal caught him in the act, confiscating the device. Your Honor, Martinez addressed the court once order was restored. We request all evidence in this case be preserved as it now pertains to a federal investigation into corruption, abuse of power, and possibly conspiracy against the United States government. With federal authorities now in control of the courtroom, the full extent of the conspiracy began to emerge. Thompson presented evidence showing how Wallace had used his position to target Eleanor after she had unknowingly gathered evidence of his connections to domestic extremist groups during Operation Blackbird. Ms. Washington's team identified several law enforcement officials with connections to these groups, Thompson explained to the stunned courtroom. Deputy Director Wallace prevented her from discovering his own connections by reassigning her before the investigation was complete, then waited for an opportunity to neutralize her as a potential threat. Judge Hamilton, realizing the seriousness of the situation and his own potential criminal exposure, attempted to clear the courtroom to suppress further revelations. Given the sensitive nature of these claims, I'm ordering the courtroom cleared of all observers. Martinez overruled him. The public has a right to witness these proceedings, particularly given the pattern of misconduct that has characterized this case from the beginning. Media representatives who had been expecting to report on Eleanor's conviction were instead documenting one of the most dramatic courtroom revelations in recent history. Reporters rushed to file updates as the conspiracy unraveled in real time. Eleanor's children arrived to witness their mother's vindication. Maya embraced Eleanor tearfully, while Jordan stood protectively nearby, his own ordeal having made him even more aware of the justice system's fragility. As federal marshals took Wallace and Porter into custody, Porter made one final desperate attempt to salvage his reputation. Ms. Washington's work doesn't excuse her financial improprieties, he insisted loudly for the benefit of the media. She exploited her position for personal gain. Martinez signaled to Thompson, who presented the final piece of evidence, Eleanor's complete NSA file. This contains Ms. Washington's full service record, including commendations for operations that saved American lives and identification of the financial transfers that Mr. Porter characterized as fraud, all of which were legitimate operational expenses and compensation. As the file was reviewed, the scope of Eleanor's service to her country became clear to everyone in the courtroom, including the jurors who had been prepared to convict her based on Porter's manipulated narrative. Case dismissed with prejudice. Judge Hamilton's words, delivered with new deference to Eleanor, officially ended the fraudulent prosecution. For Eleanor, however, the impact of those three words extended far beyond legal vindication they marked, the beginning of her family's recovery from months of systematic persecution. Porter, Wallace, Judge Hamilton, and several others involved in the conspiracy were taken into federal custody, facing charges ranging from abuse of power and evidence, tampering to obstruction of justice and civil rights violations. The investigation expanded quickly, identifying other officials throughout the justice system with connections to the domestic extremism network Eleanor had originally helped expose. NSA Director Collins held an unprecedented press conference acknowledging Eleanor's service. While we cannot discuss specific operations, I can confirm that Eleanor Washington has served this country with extraordinary distinction for over 27 years. Her actions have directly saved countless American lives and protected our national security interests in ways that may never be fully recognized publicly. The media narrative completely reversed. Headlines that had once declared, "Fraud defendant faces justice," now proclaimed, "Heroic NSA operative targeted by corrupt." Prosecutor and racism and corruption exposed in Philadelphia justice system. Investigative journalists began uncovering the broader pattern of cases where Porter and his associates had targeted minorities with questionable prosecutions. The community that had shunned Eleanor now faced its own reckoning. Neighbors who had crossed streets to avoid her approached with awkward apologies. The neighborhood association sent a formal letter of apology, with several members resigning in shame. Eleanor accepted these gestures with grace, but maintained a healthy distance, having seen the true character of many around her. Jordan's University not only reinstated his scholarship, but offered a full ride, along with a formal apology for their handling of the fabricated drug charges. The dean personally called Eleanor to express the institution's regret for failing to support her family during their ordeal. Maya, who had shown remarkable resilience throughout the crisis, received acceptance letters from several prestigious universities that had previously rejected her, including her dream school, Dartmouth. The admissions director called personally to acknowledge that external pressures had inappropriately influenced their earlier decision. Eleanor was offered promotions and public recognition within the intelligence community, but she declined both. "I've spent my career in the shadows for a reason," she told Admiral Hayes, who had returned immediately upon hearing of the case's resolution. "That's where I do my best work, and that's where I'll continue to serve." The domestic terrorism network that Eleanor had been investigating during Operation Blackbird was finally completely dismantled. With Wallace's protection gone, federal agents arrested dozens of remaining members who had escaped the initial operation, including several judges, police officers, and local government officials who had used their positions to shield the network's activities. Rather than seeking personal gain from her ordeal, Eleanor established the Washington Justice Foundation, using settlement money from her civil rights case against the city. The foundation provided legal support to individuals facing wrongful prosecution, with a special focus on cases involving systemic racism. She appointed Patricia Chen as its director, giving her former attorney a platform to continue fighting the injustices they had exposed together. Thompson received recognition for her moral courage in challenging authority. The NSA director personally commended her during a private ceremony, citing her actions as exemplary of the agency's highest values. "You demonstrated that our first loyalty must always be to the Constitution and the American people, not to individuals within our power structures," he told her. The IRS implemented new oversight measures specifically designed to prevent discriminatory auditing, with Keller's case used as a training example of how bias can corrupt the system. The judicial system in Philadelphia underwent a federal review for bias, resulting in several judges besides Hamilton being removed from the bench for patterns of discriminatory rulings. Eleanor eventually returned to her neighborhood, greeted with a mixture of respect and shame by former accusers. She chose neither to move away nor to dwell on past mistreatment, instead focusing on rebuilding her family's sense of security and continuing her work protecting a nation that had almost destroyed her. In a final private moment of closure, Eleanor visited Porter in federal detention while he awaited trial. He expected her to gloat or seek revenge. Instead, she offered something more powerful. "I'm not here to judge you," she told him through the visitor's glass. "I've seen enough of flawed judgment systems to last a lifetime. I'm here to say that I hope you use this time to examine the biases that led you to target people like me, to see us as inherently suspicious or criminal because of our race. That growth would be the only real justice that matters in the long run." Porter had no response, but something in his expression suggested her words had penetrated where legal consequences could not. The following Monday, Eleanor Washington returned to her desk at the NSA, resuming her lifetime of quiet heroism for a country that almost destroyed her, but with renewed determination to make it better from within. Her experience had revealed the depth of prejudice still embedded in American institutions, but also the potential for justice when people of conscience stand firm against corruption and bias. As she had learned through decades of protecting her nation from threats both foreign and domestic, real patriotism sometimes meant fighting the hardest against injustice within our own systems. Eleanor's silent service continued, now informed by personal experience of the very threats she had spent her life combating, and a deeper appreciation for the vigilance required to protect not just national security, but justice itself. Eleanor Washington's story offers profound lessons about justice, resilience, and systemic racism in America. First, it reveals how quickly institutional power can be weaponized against minorities when prejudice infects the system. Despite Eleanor's exemplary service to her country, she was immediately presumed guilty based on racial stereotypes. Second, it demonstrates how various systems, legal, financial, educational, and social, can work in concert to destroy an individual when bias goes unchecked. Third, it shows the importance of allies willing to risk their own safety and careers to stand against injustice. Patricia Chen, Zoe Thompson, and Admiral Hayes all chose moral courage over self-preservation. Finally, Eleanor's ordeal highlights that true patriotism sometimes means challenging corrupted institutions rather than blindly supporting them. Justice requires constant vigilance, especially for those whose society has historically marginalized. The most powerful systems demand the most rigorous oversight to ensure they serve all citizens equally. What aspects of Eleanor's story resonated most with you? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a situation where someone was judged unfairly based on their race rather than their character or actions? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can build a more just legal system that truly protects all citizens equally. If you believe stories exposing systemic racism and corruption need to be shared widely, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more content that shines light on these crucial issues. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how prejudice can corrupt even our most trusted institutions. Thank you for joining me in this powerful story of injustice, resilience, and ultimately vindication. Remember, true justice requires not just good laws, but good people willing to stand for what's right when systems fail.